Where my story with your cello and your product begins, really, it begins as a child when I first got MTV in 1990, and there was this one song. The guy was playing a bass, and it looked exactly like this.
You say it looks like this. It doesn't look like your cello.
No, but
Right.
it doesn't have a head for one thing. That's one thing about it.
Doesn't have a head.
It doesn't
And
have
that
a
was a big
head.
thing. First of all, when I made my first headless bass,
Mm.
and the following prototypes, I made various prototypes over. It was the commercialization of the product was pretty far from my mind. It wasn't about making a product that you could build a business around. It was about exploring what you could do, how you could make an instrument, electric instrument, comfortable. Certainly, that was a big part of it, but also, just somehow making it more of an expression of what's happening today and looking to the future as to how one could make an instrument. Pretty much the only thing out there at that point, 45 years ago, was a Fender bass. There was a Rickenbacker bass, and I'm not saying it was just Fender, but, and of course, this is we're having a discussion about cellos, so I don't, cut me off if I get too distracted with earlier aspects of my career.
No, because honestly, Ned, my first question to you is, your initials NS are on this cello right here. So I want to know, other people don't want to know, who is Ned Steinberger and what brought you from the inspiration to finally tackling this world of bowed stringed electric instruments. So please continue.
All right. So, and it does actually follow from what I was starting to say, in that by chance I had this opportunity to get engaged with designing an electric bass guitar for Stuart Spector, and that product turned out to be amazingly successful. They're still making it today. And imagine that. I mean, this was 45 years ago, or maybe 40 years ago. I came up with this design. It's still popular. Musicians are very conservative, really, which is something I battle every day because my orientation towards design of musical instruments is not to be conservative, but to be forward-looking. I mean, that's the idea anyway. So I got engaged with Stuart. Stuart Spector. We created this bass design, and that was well received and as an ongoing business. But in the process of designing the Spector bass, I realized that bass guitars have an inherent balance problem. And by the way, before I got involved in musical instruments, I was in the furniture business, and my thing was seating. Chairs fascinated me more than tables and bureaus because they needed complex shapes in order to be ergonomic for someone who is sitting in the chair. You want it to be comfortable, right? So part of my reason for being glad to get out of the furniture business is a furniture business is totally fashion driven.
Yeah.
Except for chairs. Chairs is the one thing where the ergonomics, the comfort, and so on also has more of a place. But if you're designing a table or, it's a horizontal surface, it's all about style and fashion. So we were making these bass guitars, and some 3 years later, the copies started to come in. Imitation is a form of flattery, right? So it wasn't that I took it so personally, but still, it was a business issue for us, that people were stealing our stuff. By the way, I respect the place that musicians come from. I respect the fact that they've woodshedded with their acoustic cello or what have you, and they don't want to change. And why should they, really? Unless they have some other reason to.
The reason I picked your cello was because of this polar piezo pickup, and I wanted to ask you what inspired you to invent this, because you're talking about how we're talking about the traditional conservative musicians, and you're talking about this is a cello that was perfected 400 years ago. How can some guy come on the scene and then convince people like me and other people watching this, convince you that this is the best electrified version of that? So
certainly I'm very proud, if that's the right word, for the instrument that we were able to offer, and it does have a lot of unique features. And the polar pickup is a big part of that. And I started out, this is kind of funny, I call it a bipolar pickup. And then people said, Ned, no,
Yeah.
you know,
That's
that's
a
not going to work.
That's
Okay,
definitely a
but
marketing no.
it's an issue there, right? But it is bipolar. So I'll admit that
Oh,
now, and
shocking.
I don't think I'm bipolar, but the pickup is, okay? The NS design business now, which includes a violin, viola, cello, omnibass, and double bass, all bowed electric instruments. I started with the bass. Most people would start with a violin because, after all, that's the front man is the violin player or whatever. You know, the violins are by far a larger market, and they are what you would think of, you know, as a string, you know, a bowed string instrument. The first thing that comes to your mind is a violin. But I got started on the bass. I sold the Steinberger Sound Company to Gibson, and I became an employee of Gibson in the process. And I was very excited about that, about being able to work for a larger established company that had their own sales departments and production. And it was like a dream come true for me because, again, I was never inclined to be a businessman. It's always about my design work. And in fact, the contract that I had with Gibson specified explicitly that I was not going to be responsible for management. And in the real world, what happened is that some 3 years later, I realized I was very unhappy working for the Gibson company. I needed to have more control over my work, to be able to do my thing, and I couldn't really do it within this corporate umbrella. So I went back on my own, and I needed to do something different. I was always excited about that long string. Suffice to say that a bass guitar is generally 34-inch scale length, and the standard three-quarter size double bass is 42-inch or 43 and three-quarter or whatever, 42 for convenience. So that's a whole different animal and was very exciting for me because I know that the harmonic structure of what any string can deliver, and we'll get back to this with the cello too because it does relate to the cello. The longer the string, the more harmonic content it has. So I was just excited about working on a bass that had a 42-inch scale. I'm going, wow, there's so much possibility here. And I worked with Rob Wasserman, who, sad to say, is no longer with us, but he really understood what I was seeking to do. And the first upright basses that I made, I had custom-made round wound strings to put on them to bring out all that harmonic content. You know, flat wound strings do not have the same high harmonics that a round wound string can deliver. And then you put a round wound string on top of this longer scale length, and now you play that low E or low B, right, which nowadays with 5-string instruments we go down to B, and it would just ring out in a way you couldn't possibly do with 34-inch scale. I got involved in making this double bass. I got very excited about it, got a very good response from musicians. And I built, probably 20 or so kind of hand-built instruments. Back then I was still in New York State. I found somebody who was able to work with me and set this whole thing up in their garage, and we would make these instruments in very small quantities. But then it seemed like the demand for this was greater than anything we could begin to accommodate at that level. And that's when I started to work with the NBE company in the Czech Republic. And so that was really the beginning of this whole cycle. This was 20 plus years ago. And now we're making violins, violas, cellos, omnibasses, which is an interesting product, and double basses. And it built the business up a step at a time. I didn't borrow any money. You know, I just came to an agreement with the people in the Czech Republic. And at that point, Peter Vikidal, who is the owner and president of NBE Company, he was working out of his garage initially. But that's a long time ago. He now has like 80 employees and a big factory, and he's very, very successful because he builds beautiful instruments, and it certainly worked out very well for us. And of course, we were very in close contact. We do our own quality control on all the instruments that we ship out. So it's a very positive relationship.
So going back to the polar piezo pickup, I'd just like to know, first off, was it revolutionary? Is it a revolutionary pickup for bowed instruments? And second, what inspired you to do that? Why did you just try to not use the humbuckers that are on electric guitars? Why did you try to reinvent the wheel?
Good question. Well, the reason for not using humbucking pickups or any kind of magnetic pickup is that magnetic pickups are sensitive to the movement of the string up and down in relation to the pickup. And think about an acoustic guitar or virtually any acoustic instrument other than a bowed instrument. You pluck the string so that it vibrates parallel to the fingerboard, not perpendicular to the fingerboard. And that's the way you get a good sound, because otherwise it's going to just do a lot of buzzing. And if you think about the top of an acoustic guitar, it's a flat top guitar. It, in fact, cannot generate any kind of projection into the room with a strictly side-to-side vibration of the string, because it's all up and down. I mean, you got a top on that guitar, and it doesn't make any sound vibrating side. No, it's a membrane that is flexible up and down. And there's a reason for that, because with an instrument that is plucked, okay, you have a tremendous attack, inherently a tremendous, that first transient, when you first pluck it, that string takes off. It's got a huge spike there, big attack. The reason that people like to make their guitars flat top is because it suppresses the attack and saves the energy to sustain over time. It's a very different problem than you have with a bowed instrument. Bowed and plucked are like night and day, and that relates to the polar pickup in a big way. We'll get to that in a minute. But suffice to say that a great pizzicato sound, a great plucked sound, you want to suppress the attack. And you want to, if you can, save that energy for more sustain going forward. It gives you a more musical response. Instead of sounding like a drum, it sounds like a guitar, which is more sustained. And if I may digress a little bit, when I first became infatuated with the idea of making an electric double bass with this long string and all the great things you could do with that and all the fun challenges that involves, I asked players, what they want, I have people I know who are serious bass players, upright bass players. And basically, with the exception of Rob Wasserman, to a man, they said, I want it to sound and feel as close to my acoustic upright as possible. And, by the way, don't try to make a bowed sound, because you can't do it with an electric. I know this from experience. So just make an instrument, that you can play pizzicato, and that feels and sounds as close to a traditional acoustic upright as possible. That was a huge challenge. You can't get a good bowed sound out of an electric instrument. What the hell is that about? Let's sort that out first. I began to understand that if you want to get a great bowed sound, you need to do just the opposite from an acoustic guitar. You need to be sensitive to the side-to-side vibration, because there is no up and down component when you use the bow. When you pluck, the string starts out, the side-to-side transient, and then it starts going in a more circular fashion. That's why, since a magnetic pickup is sensitive to up and down vibration, if it doesn't move up and down, nothing happens. So it's always moving up and down a little, so you always get a response. Acoustic guitars, as we just discussed, are sensitive up and down and not sideways, so the magnetic pickup was a perfect match for that. It was just like, God really got that one right. So electric guitars took off in the, starting in the 30s, and by the time we were in the 50s, 1950s, it was, electric guitar was king, in large part because of that natural connection between an acoustic instrument and the electric, and that the magnetic just happens to be sensitive up and down. So if you use that kind of a pickup on a bowed instrument, it doesn't work for bowing, because bowing, you need to be sensitive to side-to-side vibration predominantly. If you look at the design of a cello bridge, for example, it's a tall bridge, right? It sticks up quite a bit from the body, and the feet are pretty close together, relatively speaking. Now, part of the reason for that height is so that you have access from the low C string, up to the A string or whatever. You have to have clearance for the bow. So there's a physicality there with a high bridge is important. Another fundamental reality of that bridge is that You get sound by rocking it back and forth. You have a bass bar on one side stabilizing as a rocker point, and then on the other side you've got your sound post, which is then driving the back. It's all about this, going back and forth like this. Let's say you had an instrument like a double bass or a cello or whatever, and you had magnetic pickup on it. First of all, you know, as you bow, you get this kind of really restricted, unsatisfying response, very little deep resonance in the bass frequencies, and just marginal. And then you lift the bow, and what happens? The string starts to go around more circular pattern, and the sound swells when you pull the bow off it. Not good. Okay. You want the sound to pretty much stop when you pull the bow off it. So I did figure out how to make a great bowed sound by setting the phase and so on my pickup such that it emphasizes side-to-side motion of the bridge, which gives you that deep, rich, bowed sound. But now you go to pluck it, and it sounds like a drum. Pizzicato is used a little bit here and there, but not that much, and that's the tone character. It's kind of drum-like. It's very, very big attack and relatively little sustain. But so, on the other hand, I'm designing a bass, electric double bass, and most electric double bass players don't even use a bow or use it very little. It's really played pits, right? I mean, all jazz and so on. It's very little bow. And, you know, classical is another world, but classical players don't play electric instruments anyway. So, I mean, not in the orchestra, okay? I understand that some classical players are fascinated with electric instruments and enjoy having one and enjoy what they can do with that. It's not all one way or the other. But getting back to the pickups, the thing about the polar pickup is that it has two modes, as you know.
Yes.
And those modes are essentially our ability to go from a lateral driving system, so it's sensitive to lateral vibrations, such as what you create with the bow, and then you flip the switch, and then you have vertical sensitivity, which is more analogous to a guitar or other other plucked instruments. So that's the thing that makes the polar pickup really special, is that you have those two modes. On the one hand, it's completely dedicated to the bow, and it's all lateral sensitivity, which is great. But now you go to play pits, and you get that drum-like effect because you pluck the string, and bam, you have that huge transient. So you flip it into pits mode if you want. I'm not here to tell a musician what mode they want to play for whatever purpose. I'm here to provide opportunity, not to prescribe a certain kind of sound or whatever. And that's a whole other discussion too, in terms of the reality of making musical instruments. But in my case, I stick with versatility as a big focus in terms of the way I think about what I want to do. So now when you flip that switch, the sensitivity of the pickup is up and down. And that's what gives you the pits mode and gives you sustain and less attack and, you know, a smoother, more melodic kind of response. So that's the story behind the pickup. And it never would have happened if I hadn't started with the bass, because pizzicato mode is just generally not that important for a violinist, a violist, and even for a cellist. It's dominated by the bow, whole repertoire, all the music that you're making. But with the bass, it's different. Pizzicato mode on the bass, people playing jazz on the bass and so on, had to have a great pizzicato. And I couldn't get it. If I get a great bowed sound, I couldn't get a great pizzicato sound. So I developed a system that allows you to switch the polar response from vertical to horizontal.
Outside the flagship, which I consider the flagship CR model,
Yes.
Your company also provides other opportunities in the Wave and NXT. Would you please tell me the key differences, and will we see any upcoming additions or variants to these existing models? So basically, what is the difference between this, the Wave, and the NXT, and is there any variants in the foreseeable future for any of these three versions?
Oh, I think the 3 series are enough. Believe me, and it makes sense to have three price points. Essentially, is what these represent. Levels of investment that you have to make to be able to get an instrument. What these instruments have in common. Let's start with that. Okay, They all have the same basic pickup in them, okay?
Okay.
They vary a little in the way they're constructed, but sonically they are very, very close. The bottom line for me is that all these instruments play well, and that you can get our least expensive instrument and it will perform beautifully. And it has the same core sound as the instrument you're playing. However, for a wave instrument, it's pure passive. It has no battery or other source of power. If you have the right amplifier, it will sound great. The passive system requires a high impedance input from the amp. Not all amps have that. It's not that it's an expensive feature for an amplifier, but a passive piezo pickup has a very high impedance. So matching it up to the right amplifier becomes a little bit more of a challenge, because you need that high impedance input on the amplifier. And of course, many amplifiers have that, especially acoustic amps these days. They're also made in India. The other instruments are made in the Czech Republic, where they have a long, high-level tradition of musical instrument making. So we get to tap into all that when we're dealing with the Czech Republic. But if we want to bring something in at the most affordable possible level, which, by the way, has always been a goal of mine, because I don't make instruments for the elite, okay? I mean, I make instruments for everybody, and I believe in music and the value. I want people to be able to get an instrument that they enjoy and make music that they love without having to stress their budget extremely. I want those folks to be able to get an instrument and make music and not be shut out because the only thing available is, $5,000 or whatever. So the Wave is very dear to me, and it's incredibly well received. It does deliver professional quality sound and playability, and a lot of professionals are using them. The Wave Cello does include the polar pickup with a switch between the two. So the NXT is a mid-price instrument that is made in the Czech Republic. It has a very unique circuit in it. NXT can be played passively and be essentially the same as a Wave, or you pull up on the tone pot, and now you have an active system. That means an active system means you have a preamp and a low impedance output. So, for example, if you take a high impedance output and plug it into an amp which is designed to work with that impedance level, it sounds great. But if you take that same instrument that's passive output, plug it into your hi-fi system, it sounds, it's terrible, absolutely horrific, because they're not matched. However, once you have a preamp in your instrument, like you have in your CR, and like we have in the NXTA, it's actually called NXTA, that has an active circuit, it has onboard power, it has a low impedance output, has a lot more flexibility in terms of interfacing with other equipment. The active circuit is very advantageous, and what makes the NXTA so unique is that it has no battery. It does not require phantom power. It has a supercapacitor in it. So here's how that works. A capacitor stores electricity, not like a battery. It doesn't hold on to electricity for 5 years or something and, continue to work. But you can charge it up in 60 seconds, 1 minute. It's a great system. I didn't invent it. This was made by the MySci company. And brilliant guy who developed this product, and it's just so amazing because you don't have any batteries to replace or to worry about whether they're charged or not. You go to a gig, you plug the bass in for a minute before the gig just to make sure everything is all topped off, and off you go. You got a minimum of 16 hours of playtime, which is a pretty long concert, I'd say. That's the NXTA. So it has a very sophisticated little circuit in there. The good thing about having the passive is that it's kind of bulletproof. Once you start pumping up the capacitor number, let's say you forget your charger or something and you can't do it, you can always go into passive mode and still get a great sound.
What is the NXT and the WAV? What does that stand for?
Well, it's just names, okay? We did an outreach to our friends in the world when we came out with that product. We said, you give us the name and we'll give you one of these instruments. Come up with a great name. NXT really refers to next. NXT. It was suggested to us by someone who responded to our contest or whatever,
All right.
and that's the name.
And the A, the NXT A, what does the A stand for? The active? What does the A stand for?
That was the original NXTs were all passive, but then we upgraded to the passive and active modes, and that's why it became an A.
Oh, active. And WAV is just
you got to call it something, so we call it wave.
Because people want to know.
A lot of our English distributor, God bless him, he's complains to this day, that's a WAV, it's not a wave, and so whatever. I don't really remember exactly how we came up with that name.
If you're watching this video, you have to understand all of them have the same polar piezo pickup, which is incredible, so you don't have to spend CR money to get CR sound. You can get that in your waves.
Well, the CR, I haven't really described the CR. The electronics are much more sophisticated.
Okay.
The craft and everything that goes into those instruments are the top that we can offer. But from an electronic standpoint, now with a CR instrument, you've got a battery in there, which has a lot more power than a supercapacitor. And a lot more control. You have active, treble, and bass control.
Yes. And
you also have you have that three-way switch, okay? And when it's in the pits mode at one extreme, we talked about that. That's going to give you one of the things I deal with is that people are using the pits mode with the bow, and then they're complaining that it doesn't have an even response and so on, which is true. In the pits mode, does not bow well unless you have a specific kind of funky sound you're looking for. Again, there's no law against doing, as a musician, you get to do whatever you want to do. But if you're not really savvy to what that switch does and you try to use your bow in the pits mode, it could be very unsatisfying. And people will think, well, they should bow well in every position, every switch. Well, not really. This system is designed to do different kinds of things, and if you want to really get that more even and sustained pit sound, you need to do something that is counterproductive for bowing. So that's why the switch exists there. Plus, there's a third position, and that is a kind of an acoustic filter. Main thing it does is it wipes out low end that you will never hear on a cello. Okay.
On a traditional cello.
Cello has a limited.
On a traditional cello, we make that super important.
An acoustic cello really doesn't produce the fundamental of the C. That low note, you're hearing the first harmonic. You're not hearing the fundamental because the cello doesn't really go there.
Okay.
And it still sounds deep and rich. I mean, I love acoustic cello sound. So, but if you want to sound a little more like an acoustic cello, which is not my primary focus, but still, a lot of people want to be able to express themselves in a way that's more analogous to an acoustic instrument. And so that third switch position is, a high pass filter to have a very, very dramatic drop off in the low frequency response at around 180 cycles, which is what you have on an acoustic instrument.
May I ask about the circuitry? So I know the pickup yours, but now we're talking about the preamp, the inners. I don't know this world very well, but the inners, the electronics, is that your proprietary in the CR level, or is that someone else who made it for you guys?
Oh, we don't make our own electronics.
Okay.
But we do specify the parameters that we want these electronics to accomplish.
Where are they from? Would you mind telling me where the electronics come from? Do they come from China, Japan, Europe?
They originally came from they all come from the U.S. actually.
Really?
Yes. The circuit I was telling you about in the NXTA is made in Boston.
Okay.
Brilliant guys there. Also, the electronics in the CR are made by EMG Company, famous for their pickups and for electric guitar pickups and electric bass guitar pickups. And I did some testing among my clientele, and they all love the EMGs, and that's sort of how that got started, and so we continue to have EMG as a supplier for those CR electronics. The Polar pickup is ours. We make it ourselves. It's all proprietary of our own.
Is the EMG, is that an American company? Where are they located?
EMG is located in California, and they are at one of the top level magnetic pickup companies out there.
I love when you say that because, I'm from California, I'm from Texas, California now, third life here in Europe. I'm all about supporting local companies and local businesses. That's why I really love the fact it's made in the EU in the Czech Republic. But actually, you're now telling me it's made in California as well, so that kind of makes me happy too.
Sure. The electronics are, again, the Euro electronics were made in California, yes.
That's super cool. Let's talk about the wood. The wood for the bridge is?
That's maple, dyed black, yes. And maple is desirable for the bridge because it's lightweight and rigid. Stiffness to weight ratio is very important.
That's definitely something interesting about that. I would like to talk about, because I've always looked at this, like, people see it like, what is that? They don't even know what, so it's maple dyed black.
And the reason for that is that imagine you had a white maple bridge in there. I don't think it would look that good.
I think it looks great. I think you're not trying to be like this. You're trying to be something different. Rich light. So rich light. Tell me, why did you choose rich light for this? I love beautiful. This is Pernambuco, but I understand it's endangered wood. That's ebony. That's also endangered wood. Why did you choose rich light for the fingerboard?
Well, essentially, as you say, ebony is, been over-harvested, and the supply of ebony is endangered for that reason, and so certainly it is very appealing to avoid being part of that whole process, which is depleting the forests. So that's a big factor. Also, the rich light has very good properties for a fingerboard. First of all, it's flawless.
It is.
And any flaw in a finger, wood varies a little bit. It's also, to get jet black, perfect ebony is extremely expensive. Okay.
Yes.
So,
yes, it is.
This way we are able to make the highest performance instrument with a great look. Even though the CR instruments are pretty expensive, they could be a lot more expensive if we weren't thoughtful about, using our resources efficiently. When I started out, I made, the Steinberger headless bass and guitar. They're made out of plastic from one end to the other. They're not made out of wood. They're carbon fiber. Okay. So it's reinforced plastic, which is a whole different animal than plastic. And I use the word plastic to be a little provocative because obviously who thinks of something of high quality being made out of plastic, right? It's
they say composite
in people's minds. But
it's a composite.
Certainly composites are, huge, extremely high performance structures. And it's always been about the structure for me, how the instrument is structured. And so I started out early in my career with, making instruments from carbon fiber. I used phenolic fingerboard, which is very similar to the rich light, with great results over the years. And so I believe in the value of those materials. And what's even more interesting is the fingerboard we use on the Wave Series cellos, which is what we call co-form. And that's a fascinating process because we buy a sheet of material. We could call it a polymer or we could call it plastic, your choice. Polymer usually goes over a little better with the general public, but it's still plastic, okay? So the properties of this material we use are extremely good, very hard. We take a flat sheet and then we form it to the curve of the fingerboard. It's extremely efficient. And that's what you need. If you're going to make an instrument that you can sell, for under $1,000, you better be efficient about it. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to do it or you're going to go broke. So these traditions are established and people want to stay within that tradition, and that's great. But that's not what we're about. We're about understanding materials that are available today and utilizing those materials that perform the best and that are the most efficient and cost effective for us to use in production, and we get to deliver those benefits to our customers.
For the recessed dots, what are the dots made of on the cello, and why did you opt for this sort of for the markings on the cello?
It was Tony Levin actually who got me started on that. Tony Levin is a very famous rock bassist. He plays upright as well as bass guitar. And let's say you're at a recording session and you're supposed to come in with an F sharp at a certain point, but you haven't been playing. You want to be right on the money. So these dots are certainly very helpful for learning the instrument, but they're also helpful for the top players to be able to optimize their abilities. So if you have these reference points, you can use them when you're coming in from a rest and make sure you're really close to the note you want to be because you know it visually.
Yep.
So it's just all about making the instrument more accessible.
On the materials of your instruments, your beautiful instruments, particularly the CR, comes in different wood finishes. That's why I really like about my past zebrawood 6-string cello and this 5-string, even though it is like the zebrawood was something, it's still a finish, and that's why you see this beautiful integrated. Now this is poplar burl. I went for that option because I felt, again, I want to play more metal on my cello. I felt it looks like bone. I felt like, I don't know, it's the most exotic looking of all.
Very cool.
Of all the woods I've seen in my life. I've seen Zeta cellos, I've seen all different cellos, like the different woods, and I'm a total geek on wood. This poplar burl in this color, I love it. I love it. So where does this wood come from?
So here's the thing on the fact is that if you're going to have, some kind of exotic species in very limited quantities, put it on a musical instrument. That's where it belongs. That's how I see it, seriously, because we don't use that much. It's part of a much bigger package, and it provides a kind of a fun visual, and it's not going to deplete the world supply in anything comparable to the way that using it to panel your office or your store.
So where does it come from, this wood, particularly the poplar burl? Do you know where?
No, okay. I don't know. Europe, I think it's someplace in Europe.
Okay.
But it's sourced by our supplier and, by the NBE company, and I never asked them where it came from specifically.
Okay. That's all I'm always interested in knowing, because it's probably from the Ukraine or Poland or something, like people.
I think there's a lot of wood that's in Eastern Europe has a lot of great forests and a lot of great wood. The
strings that it ships with, these are helichords, I believe, and you have a low F and a high E.
They're not helichord, actually. They're very similar to helichord.
Okay.
Helichord was a string that was developed by Norman Pickering for the D'Addario company.
Okay.
And Norman Pickering, you're probably too young to remember the Pickering cartridge in your phonograph. But when I was growing up, we all had Pickering cartridges, all invented by Norman Pickering, who also happened to be a very high-level violist and a serious engineer. But when I met him, he was working for the D'Addario String Company, developing the helichord strings. And so they come from him. And they are tweaked slightly for our electric, but they are similar to a helichord, but not identical.
We're super otaku about strings, us cello players, and we're always looking for the best strings. Now, I personally, I would like to know, do all the NS levels, the Wave, the NXTA, and the CR, do they all ship with the same string?
No, I believe that the Wave ships with Prelude strings, which is a brand of the D'Addario, which is more of a student brand. Strings are expensive, and on that Wave instrument, it's all about cost effect, getting to most value for the dollar or whatever, and so it didn't make sense to put those expensive strings on there. Of course, you can always put them on, in addition to which the Prelude strings sound pretty damn good too. So more affordable.
Two things cello players are very subjective is the rosin, the colophane we use, and the strings. Now for me, I didn't like the strings because I'm a Larson guy. A lot of people love Larsons, and that's
Sure.
super expensive. But for anyone watching this, I changed all four strings for Larson manga cores, the Magna cores, the top of the line little red one. I have them up there. And I found out, if anyone's watching this, don't use manga cores, at least for the G. I had to go regular. It was it was good for the A and the D, and the C, but the G was it was too much for this.
Too bright.
It was too bright for the G. So I went just to a regular Larson, regular medium tension. Also had strong tension. Strong tension, I used that on the G. That was also a big mistake. So I went regular medium tension on all the strings, but these are 3 manga cores with a medium tension regular Larson. With the high E, I didn't option for that because I want to go low, but I was able to find Larson high E, which is not supposed to exist, by the way, but I have a Larson string for cello high E, so something you guys...
Your 6th string. Well, that string is particularly difficult, that high E string on a cello. It's very difficult to make a wound string for that pitch and tension that's required. The string is essentially twice as long as a violin, and it's tuned an octave lower than a violin. But if you were to play the octave note on your high E string on your cello, that's essentially like playing an E string on a violin. People want a wound string for the high E on a cello because it does mellow it out a little bit, make it more like the rest of the instrument. But inherently, that string is going to be bright and violin-like. For a lot of cellists, having a string that's so violin-like is kind of off-putting because it's got so much brilliance and everything. But if you want to have a 6-string cello and you want to go up to E and you want to have a full cello scale length, that's the reality. That string, in any case, is going to get very bright. And some people, of course, love that. It's all a whole nother dimension to their instrument. But if someone wants it to be always cello-like, that high E string is a challenge.
The tastiere con piano, which we call in English the Romberg bevel, that flat bit underneath the C string. I noticed that it's not, I don't see it prominent. I don't see it at all on this CR5. Do your instruments, your 4 instruments, or for any of your instruments of the cellos, come with the Romberg bevel. Have you changed that design?
The 4 strings, I believe, do have that, though that has evolved a lot, and the need for it on an electric instrument is quite different. I mean, the purpose of that is to provide more relief for the low string, so you can bow it more aggressively without it flapping against the fingerboard. Right, that's why that's been developed that way.
I understand that traditionally, but I have now a 5-string and no matter how much I push down on the lowest string, which should vibrate the most, I don't get a rattle, I don't get it touching, and so
I think that it's just not necessary on an electric instrument to do that, and so we've moved away from that largely because it's a little more playable or whatever if you just have a continuum with a fingerboard rather than that bevel that's put in there. So, I mean, you could argue it either way, but
as of today,
for electric, it's really not necessary.
So as of today, the Wave, the NXTA, and the CR of all 4, 5, 6 string have an even. They don't have the tastiere con piano. They don't have the Romberg bevel.
Correct.
Okay. What did they ever have it in the past?
We've made them that way too, and frankly, I'm not even 100% sure exactly whether that's been ended or not, or
okay.
But I think essentially, certainly on the Wave instruments, we do not use that, and I don't believe we're using that the CR or the NXTA 4-string. Certainly, it would only be on a 4-string, and a 5 and 6 string definitely do not use that.
All right. So, which brings me to two options that is really cool about your instrument. You have to explain one option to me because I don't understand it. You can do two adjustments like on the fly. You can adjust the bridge height with the Phillips screwdriver on the back, two screws. Can make it higher and lower, which I haven't done yet. The stock height, by the way, is great. I haven't changed anything. But honestly, you gotta help me out with this. It came with this Allen wrench. I'm like, what is this? And I noticed that you can stick it up here and adjust what? Because I said it's supposed to adjust the precision of the markings, these dots. Could you please explain it to me?
No, what that is, adjust the truss rod, okay? Truss rod is a metal rod that goes the length of the neck, and traditional bowed instruments, cellos and violins and so on, don't have that. Even basses don't have that, but it's a huge advantage because what you can do with that is to control the camber of the neck, the amount of relief in the fingerboard. You know, fingerboards are not straight. They have end to end, they have a slight curvature to them. And in fact, for bowed instruments, we follow that tradition closely on the way fingerboards are made on bowed instruments, and you have more curve on the low strings and less curve on the high strings. That's called relief. How much relief is in the fingerboard?
Okay.
So we're able to adjust that with that truss rod, which changes the amount of curve that you have in the fingerboard. So if you were to hold your finger down on the string at just next to the nut and all the way at the end of the fingerboard. So if you hold your finger down there and then hold it at the end of the fingerboard, but you have to do them both at once. It's a little tricky. You know, if you hold both ends, then you can see how much clearance there is under the string in the middle. You see there is some clearance, right?
Yes, there is.
And check out the low string and you'll see it has a lot more clearance.
Yes, it does.
That's a tradition in bowed instruments that is, you know, without question of great value, that was developed by the great masters. So, you know, one of the things that happens is that seasonally the relief changes when you have an ebony fingerboard. That's another big advantage of the Richlight. Mm-hmm. It's more stable, okay?
Okay.
But if you have an ebony fingerboard, it's going to tend to change from summer. It will get flatter, less relief, and then in the winter when it gets very dry and the wood dries out, it gets more relief. So that's an undesirable reality of working with ebony, but it's, you know, still with many ebony instruments out there. And even so, the neck can change a little over time. So with that truss rod, you're able to maintain optimal playability without having to take it to your luthier and have him dress the fingerboard.
So if I get this correct, you place this in and you rotate it, and what does it do to the relief?
It can add relief or reduce relief.
Okay, on the fly.
Changes the amount of relief, yes.
That's cool.
And this is standard with guitars and bass guitars and that whole tradition, but it hasn't been a tradition in the bowed instrument field. No. But it's a big advantage. Also, you got to understand that our neck is a lot longer than you have on a traditional cello, right? In that the neck itself is connected to the body, mm-hmm. So that it is less in need of a truss rod. When you have a really long neck like that, it's important to be able to control the relief more so than with a traditional cello.
I discovered these are Schallers, and okay. I'm gonna say they're Schaller M6s. Okay. Your machine heads. Can you deny or confirm that?
I don't remember the model designation, but they're Schallers, and Schaller makes a great tuner. You know, traditional cello has friction tuners, which to me, you know, it's Stone Age technology, really. These tuners here will keep you much easier to tune up and stay in tune. That's an advantage of the electric for sure.
So the question is this though, because I will be doing a comparison of this one and the Yamaha SVC. And the Yamaha uses, by the way, anyone watching this, I've done my research, the Yamaha uses just Chinese machine heads, okay? To keep it real. They're not made in Japan. You can buy those off AliExpress right now. Now these are pricey, these are nice, these are made in Germany, say it so, the Schallers. But why did you option for these instead of the bass machine head. People say it's, they feel that it could break. It's not strong enough to hold the guitar. I mean, excuse me, the cello strings. These are just like guitar tuners. So why did you option for those instead of the machine heads that for bass?
The bass tuners are unnecessary, oversized, and not as much fun to look at or to use. So we don't have any problem with people breaking these tuners. We do sometimes have a little bit of problem on the bass, because if we, for example, on our uprights, we use tuners that were originally designed for bass guitar, okay? But the tension on the bass, upright bass strings can be way higher than the bass guitar, and we have had some issues there with dependability, but not much. But those tuners have worked for the cello. They just seem to work flawlessly. We're very happy with them.
I'm very happy with it too. But I would be remiss to say, of all the beauty that is the vision that you have in this part of your instrument, and I talked about this with you already, but I do want to mention again, what makes this instrument, what makes NS instruments just so incredibly unique, in my opinion. And I make a joke with people, like my cello teacher came by and he says, "How do you play that?" Because he played it like a banjo in your hand. This, I think, I considered a work of engineering art. This is the end pin stand. Tell me, how did you dream this whole thing up? Because
Well, you could talk about, how things are dreamed up. Basically, my way of working is to, it's all about problem solving. You have an electric instrument and you want to get rid of all that, the body, you want to give access to the neck all the way down and take advantage of the benefits of the electric format. Primarily people use our tripod stands, which is great because it's self-standing. You don't have to figure out where to put it or whatever, and it's just right there. Now, not everyone likes those. A lot of people prefer the end pin. So you have your choice, and you also have your choice of, the frame strap system, so you can, run around on stage with your cello, which people have a lot of fun with that. So it's about versatility. It's about taking advantage of the opportunities an electric instrument presents. When you go to an electric instrument, you do give up some very wonderful features of an acoustic instrument, namely that you have an instrument which is completely self-contained, which you don't have to plug it into the wall or do any other kind of, you don't have to know all that technology. You just have the instrument in hand. It resonates against your body. It's a beautiful thing, and it cannot be really fully replicated in an electric instrument. But there are so many opportunities to do fun and exciting things with these instruments.
Did you design this yourself? Or who came up with this part? Because I find this to be so super minimalistic. It's beautiful. I consider this just as much artwork as that right there, because it collapses so wonderfully. It's so portable. Did you design this yourself?
Yes, everything is. I don't hire other designers.
Okay, that's
I'm
great.
stuck with it myself, but I love to design things. See, this is the thing. I'm basically addicted to designing things, and more so lately because, with the advent of 3D modeling, all these cello, all that precedes my work with 3D modeling. But over the last years, I've become very much engaged with that method of working. And it's fantastic because you can create a design in 3 dimensions in your computer, virtual 3-dimensional object, and then somebody can print it out for you, just like you were to take print out your email, or whatever when you need to, or your Word program, but you can print out 3-dimensional objects nowadays. It's really quite something, very exciting. So that's what I love to do, is the design part of it. That's what I am, a designer primarily. I'm not a musician, but the challenges of making a musical instrument that plays beautifully, sounds terrific, and is visually appealing. Those are the 3 criteria that go into any musical instrument, and it's fun stuff to do.
I noticed that you have, well, people are very traditional. We, cellists, we have this technique of moving to the fourth position here, and we have
Right.
the nape of the neck. I call the
You have a
apex,
reference there.
the apex of the parabola, and there used to be a little piece that you could buy, and that would mimic that. You could still buy it in some retailers, but I don't think that's available anymore.
I think it's available. You could buy it direct from us, I believe, online. Yeah.
I was thinking about getting that, but yet you have this little, I'll show it in my comparison video, but you have this tiny little brass bit here. And honestly, I was thinking about getting that attachment, but then this works great. That's it. That's all you need.
Well, then you can. The point is too that you can go beyond that. I mean, the access all the way up the neck is something that is, you don't have to go into thumb position to play the upper notes unless you want to. So your choice. Again, taking advantage of the opportunity that an electric instrument offers. You don't have to have that body up there restricting your hand access. Maybe most people who are making electric cellos are really wedded to making it feel as much like an acoustic cello as possible, which is a perfectly valid thing to do. It has to be accessible to an acoustic player because that's where the expertise lies. I mean, people learn to play an acoustic cello and they're interested in electric, and they start out with all the skills that they learned on the acoustic, and so you need to make it accessible to someone with those skills to start with, that tradition and that commitment they made to the acoustic instrument. But then when you go electric, you could put all the limitations that you have on your acoustic instrument, impose that on the electric. For some people that might be nice, but it's just the opposite of what I'm trying to do, which is to open up the possibilities sonically, in terms of playability and versatility of sound and all the things you can do with an electric instrument. That's what I want to focus on. And I consider it, you were asking earlier, how come we get such a great sound out of this instrument? And it's just really letting the cat out of the bag. It's got a great sound. A good set of strings, they're the tone generator, okay? The strings, everything, it starts with the string. And so just being able to listen to that string and convert it into an electrical signal without some kind of preset notion that it somehow has to sound exactly like an acoustic instrument. So then if you're in that frame of mind and you're running around trying to filter the sound or whatever, trying to kind of create this imitation of an acoustic instrument. But I'm not interested in imitation. I'm interested in an original product with its own voice and which looks to the future.
I want to ask you, our world as a classical cello world is notoriously conservative. Have you ever encountered pushback from luthiers? And can a local luthier work on your cello? And I'm going to add to this, do you consider yourself a luthier?
I don't know what the definition of a luthier is, but I have made many musical instruments, although the instrument you're have in your hand there, I didn't make it. I designed it, but I didn't make it. Our instruments are factory made in a very specialized factory with great craftspeople working there and so on, but also with CNC milling machines and all the latest programming and technology that we can get. Musical instruments these days are better than ever. I mean, think how much more we've got going for us now. First of all, we know everything they did, because we have the historical record of that, so that's a resource.
Yeah.
And, if Antonio needed a drill bit, to drill a hole and, for the pegs or whatever, he'd have to go down to the local blacksmith and explain to him exactly what he wanted, and probably would be pretty crude, certainly by any comparison to what we have today. People may not like the idea that the top of their cello was carved on a computer-operated machine, but trust me, you can carve a hell of a top on a computerized machine. And yes, to make a fine acoustic instrument does involve tapping the top and a human element there, without a doubt. But the resources that a great luthier has today are just astronomical compared to what was available to the old masters, and they're making great instruments. and they're accepted too as such. And so it's a new world, and what's going on in the fabrication of fine acoustic instruments is really something special. And here's the thing: we all have our preconceived notions about what is good and what is not good, and if it's got a certain brand name on it or a certain luthier from way back when, and that's who built it, then it's impossible for a human being to ignore the prejudice that you bring to a given situation. For example, musicians will say that they only care about the sound. Really, they don't care about anything else, just the sound. But it's not true, okay?
No, they're lying.
Even the top players, to a fair degree, they hear with their eyes. And if they see an instrument that appears beautiful to them, they're going to play it beautifully and it's going to sound great. Yep. If they look at an instrument and they don't really like it, they think it's, whatever, not cool, it's going to sound terrible. It's just the way it is. It's interesting phenomenon.
People have looked at this instrument. I have, my friends, and people who are outside this world are definitely like, what is that contraption? They're like, what is that? It doesn't, like, especially when it's broken down, it doesn't resemble anything like a traditional cello, but I still think it is beautiful in everything, especially when you guys go with the effort of putting the different finishes on it. It is beautiful, and it inspires definitely me, and I think players across the world who play your instruments, to just take their playing to not just a new level, but to a completely different space. That the amplified music world, this pedal box I'm just discovering, what you throw these names out and it's just so common. Like, what's new to a classical musician like me? I'm like, all right, I'm discovering this. This is new, all very new to me. Tone and impedance and IRs and effects and cabs, and
it's fairly intimidating for a lot of classical players because they haven't been, guitar players have been exposed to electrified instruments from day one, but string players are different. Have a different history and relationship to electric instruments, which, when the electric guitar first became popular, of course, electrified string instruments were nowhere to be seen, and that has a lot to do with the fact that magnetic pickups are so naturally suitable for a guitar and so unsuitable for a bowed instrument. And then it was the piezo technology that really opened up the future for electric bowed instruments, and that really is technology that was made available after the electric guitar had achieved its great popularity.
I don't really care about the violin at all at this point. When did you first make your first electric cello?
I'm terrible with dates, but it must have been close to 20 years ago, yeah.
So around 2000?
Exactly.
Late 90s, 2000?
Around 2000, I'd say, yeah, right around then. Here, I meant to bring this down. Give me 1 second, I'll go get something.
Sure.
All right, I found it. And what this is, looks a little familiar. It looks a little like your cello.
Yeah,
doesn't
it does. Yeah, it does.
And here, let me take it off the stand here. This is the very first mock-up really that I made. So this instrument, you can see again, it has a lot of similarity to the cello, some differences. This is the very first one I ever made, and it's a mock-up. It was never intended to be played. It's made out of a cheap wood. And this is just a piece of pine that I dyed black to see what it would kind of look like on the instrument. So I work everything out that way. I don't start by trying to make a perfect instrument. I work out all the details, and you can see that this has this plate on the back to hold the strings. I gave that up and changed that and so on. And, I mean, these knobs here, there's no electronics in this thing or anything. It's just a way to develop the idea. And here, interesting, on the back of the neck, you see I have two different points of reference, bigger than those little pins that you have. But that was the origin of the thinking there. This is all just made out of the cheapest materials, but that's how I work out the ideas. I work, and so I can change it quickly. I haven't made a big investment in some beautiful piece of flame maple or something, and well, I guess I'll have to live with that. I did it that way.
That's great,
now
though.
But no, this way I get it all worked out in advance, and that's how I work. It's really how I develop all these instruments, is by first mocking it up, and with a great deal of flexibility and without a lot of investment in craft, but just focused on the design.
That's so cool. Did you make the cello before the violin, or the violin came before the cello?
I think that it was the bass, cello, violin.
Ah, so we came first.
Yes. I've always been that way.
You're my type of guy. That's super cool. That's not much different. So that was like your prototype. That's your mock-up.
Well, it's I don't call it a prototype because a
Doesn't
prototype would be, in my terminology, I mean, you call it whatever you want, but I think of a prototype as a working model.
Yeah.
This is
Proof of concept.
just a paste up, just an exploration of design opportunities and limitations, and then from a mock-up, I would make a prototype.
That's really cool. So 20 years now, these things have been made, at least 20 years, a good 20 years. I'll put 20-year mark on that. And what do you see for the next 20 years for your company?
Well, that's an interesting question.
What does the future have?
20 years from now, I will be 90 plus years old. Okay. So, there's challenges going forward. And ultimately, I need to have some kind of succession plan, because I can't do this forever. I'm getting older. We'll keep doing what we're doing for a while. And in terms of new products, I'd say that, for example, we're going to be coming out with a 6-string violin coming up pretty soon, which we're excited about. We have never had a 6-string violin. So there's new stuff happening, and there's refinements always. It's never done. There's always a way to make it better, and I'm always looking to understand how to do that and to do it whenever possible to improve the product. So that's ongoing. So we just keep doing what we've been doing, and but on the long run, as I get older, then we have to find new blood to take over the future of the company.
The new generation sees cello as not just a symphonic instruments. Like, I was a cello geek. I was a little Ninja Turtle with the cello on my back. I was a geek. Now cello's pop culture. It's 2 cellos. It's everywhere. It's in rock music. It's everywhere. And I definitely see it in my vision as it fits in very well with rock groups, with different genres of music, from hip hop, jazz, metal, pop music. I think electric bowed instruments is going the next level, and I still don't get
no question about it.
And I see it, the cello, particularly cello, as getting more expanded into different genres of music. And you're the gold standard. You're the benchmark of what an instrument like this should sound like.
Electric bowed instruments are still not accepted by many people.
No.
I remember I was telling you earlier about the DePonte String Quartet local here in my rural area in Maine. I happen to be a classical music fan myself. So I was there at one of these concerts, and the sad thing is they're all old people at these concerts. The young people do not listen to classical music very much, from what I've seen, and the audience is aging, and there's all kinds of challenges that classical musicians face around the viability of careers and so on in the field. And that's where these electric instruments can be a godsend, because now you can find other kinds of employment. You can play more popular gigs and so on with the electric instrument. But when I started out, when I was first making violins, for example, all excited about violins. You've heard of Strings magazine?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I put 2 half-page ads for the new NS violin. I was all excited about it. Beautiful picture, so on. Can you guess how many people responded to that ad? It's a very round number.
I'm not gonna say that, but
Slide 0.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? And nobody is interested in
What
this
year
stuff.
was that? What year was that particularly? Because I remember at one time I've seen an NS ad in a magazine, in a strings magazine, and it's when I had your my first the zebra wood version. I'm like, hey, look, there was an older. I don't know what year it was, but it was an older version. But you had it was a full page ad.
Just suffice to say that the interest in electric bowed instruments is growing, and thank God, because when I started out, the interest was very, very low. Also, our instruments are more radical. You know, headless violin. I mean, people are going, "Oh my God, this guy's out of his mind." But times have changed enormously since then. Back in those days, I can remember a couple of times, and I'm not a salesperson, so I don't spend time on the road, you know, promoting what I do and so on. I work with a team where we have folks who do that. But still, I'm walking around some new town I'm visiting or something. I come across a violin shop. I'd go in and see what's going on, you know, and I would say, you guys have any electric violins here? And they'd look at me like, no, what are you talking about? And they basically, we're just completely disinterested. If I go into a violin shop today and I say, you know, what do you think about electric instruments? Or indicate to them that I have some expertise in the field, they're all over it. Really, you know, maybe I don't have any in my shop now, but I really need to get some in. What do you recommend? And it's like night and day from 20 years ago and today. I was starting to tell you this story of going to this DePonte concert. And with all these old people there, you know, this is a string quartet. They're playing Beethoven, Haydn, and so on. And so at intermission, I happened to be sitting next to this charming elderly woman, and she was a little chatty, and we got talking. And I said, "Oh yeah, no, I make violins." I know the guys up there very, very well, the DePonte Quartet members, and they have a complete set of electric instruments as well, but which they play rarely. But
hopefully yours.
Yes, definitely. And so I said, "Oh yeah, I make violins," and I said, "Yeah, I make electric violins." And she was so animated and excited that I make violins, but as soon as she heard it was electric, her whole expression just fell. She was so bummed out, you know, that they would be electric. And that's still very much part of the real world. People have that attitude, but it's changing, and for good reason. Electric instruments are getting better and better, and the need for them is growing, and musicians are responding. So I got lucky. I mean, I didn't think any of that through. It's not like I looked and said, electric string instruments are going to get big over time, you know, going to grow. It was just that I was fascinated with the design opportunity to make really high quality electric instruments, and I got lucky because it turned out to be a field that was really growing.
Is there any message you want to give to people who would watch this interview, who would like to know maybe a little more, a message just about your instruments in general?
Well, if you're interested in the instruments I make and my career in this field, there is a biography called Ned Steinberger, a story of creation and design or something like that. It's a pretty fun book, and certainly you could learn more than you want to know about me, I'm sure, from this book, and about the instruments that I've made over the years. And so I would recommend that to anybody who has further interest.
Well, I'll definitely check it out. Thank you for telling me that. Before we go, I still keep seeing the violin in the background over there. I see something on the wall. It looks like a traditional violin way back there.
Yeah, okay.
What is that? Is that a violin? Just a regular violin?
That's a traditional violin, yes. So, I mean, that's the inspiration for the whole thing. Certainly, I have instruments around to compare measurements and so on, because it has to be, these instruments have to perform for musicians that have learned on the acoustic instrument. And so I have to be very well aware of what those parameters are on acoustic instrument and make sure that those key relationships are maintained.
I think we cover the entire instrument. Again, it's a beautiful creation that you have. Again, it's radical in its design. I think it's forward thinking. I think to everyone in the Czech Republic and in India that create these, the guys at EMG in California, and of course in your company there in the US, from all the cello players out there, if we haven't had a chance, let this, at least if I could channel all of them, thank you, Ned. You have created
Well,
something
thank you.
for all of
Really,
us. All of
it's
us.
all about you. It's not about me. It's about musicians and about music. So that it's working for you and for others is so satisfying for me. I can't even begin to really fully express that. But it's wonderful to be able to talk to you. And,
Thank you.
you know, musical instruments have a kind of a magical quality for musicians. But for those of us who make them, it's more nuts and bolts or whatever, more very grounded in a harsh reality of getting that neck to the right shape in it and the right curve and all. It's very, very picky stuff, you know, and you get it all right. So when it's right and when great music gets played, wow, it is magic, isn't it? So that's such a wonderful thing to be connected to. So I thank you and all the musicians out there who are making music on my instruments or on other people's instruments. And right now, music is very, very important for the world because the world is struggling under this coronavirus, and music is more important than ever. So keep up the good work, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.